Доброго дня. Ми розпочинаємо нашу наступну.
So, good afternoon. We're going to start our next panel in the framework of our forum, the one that is going to be dedicated to the fiscal policy in the deficiency conditions. And we're going to have, I'm going to be presenting you with the main resilience factors that we have outlined for this years and the main risks that we have outlined as well. And basically, we're going to be focusing for the future, but we're going to be discussing the issues, the current issues as well. We're going to have a discussion that is going to be joined by Olena Makeieva, who is the General Director of the auditing company Aksonova&Associates, and she has a lot of experience of working with taxes and auditing, I think even more than 20 years. And Olena is going to prove me wrong if no. And she has been the advisor and the Deputy of Ministry of the Finance at some point of time. So I think we're going to be really interested to listen to her approach to the fiscal policy. We have Svitlana Mykhailovska, who is the Deputy Head of the European Business Association, and who is on the other side. We need to have the representatives of the other parts of the other side of the fiscal policies from the state, and whether the state is efficient in collaborating with business in the terms of fiscal policy. That is an important factor for the resilience of the country as well. So that is why we have invited Volodymyr Kutsenko to talk to us. He's an expert of the Council for the Business Ombudsman, and so basically as an expert of the Business Ombudsman's Council, that's the person who is going to keep up with what is going on right now with the administration of the taxes, how it's going on, what it works, what's going on overall. So I think that Volodymyr is not for just, there has been 1 or 2 billion hryvnias that have been saved for Ukrainian businesses. I don't know the full amount of money but I'm sure that Volodymyr has an extensive experience in the topic of taxes. So let us start our discussion, and I would like to ask you to turn my presentation on because I would like to start with the general outlook. And during the wartime, in the context of fiscal policies, the most important thing is how we can finance our expenses, the expenses for the defense and providing the critical expenses as the healthcare is, the basic social needs of the population, and providing the continuation of the work of the critical infrastructure, the energy sector, logistics. This is something that is the most important during the war. But we also need to keep in mind the classical goals and the classical aims of the fiscal policies, which is actually the redistribution of the money, extraction and redistribution of the money, extraction through the taxation matters and redirecting it to the state budget. And the second goal would be the stimulation through deficiency. So depending on how high the deficiency of the budget is, how high the difference is between what the state extracts from the economy and what it directs into the economy, the fiscal policy is either harsh or soft that stimulates. So, and the third aspect in the fiscal policy is it's actually this incentives, let us put it this way, the incentives for the businesses, that are going to be provided through this interest rates and creating the base for that. The fiscal policy has been very soft this year, has been very soft due to the external reasons, and the income on taxes was 769 billion hryvnias for 10 months, and we had 856 last year, but the expenses have increased almost twice. That have been almost 2.5 times more than our income, and it has been even higher than the previous years. So that was a very soft fiscal policies, and I do believe that's one of the reasons why the economy, even due to a lot of challenges and a lot of shocks, why the Ukrainian economy feels more or less good, because all of those expenses, all of those state expenses that have been partly financed financed by the state support, they're all is being targeted to the economy, and they're all stimulating the demand, they all stimulating the economy that has and the industry that has the new inquiries coming on. So that was a stimulating fact. So what I wanted to talk to you about, I would like to identify the main 5 factors of the fiscal resilience. First of all, the equal support, financial support, being adaptive and flexible to the situation, the adaptivity of the fiscal policy to the situation and economy, quite clear and transparent financial of the VAT, and providing the temporary discounts and providing the fiscal new standards and working with the customs. And we're going to be talking about the challenges after the war, after the military actions are going to be ended. So the first point is, so when we're talking about the current fiscal policy during the wartime, we have to understand that currently we have this critical dependence on the external assistance, on the foreign assistance. For the year 2023, you can see that our income of the state that have been introduced to the budget, they're not really high, the expenses that we use for the defense and safety. So, you know, we can only fit into actually for the healthcare expenses or education expenses. And so deficiency is not considering the loans that have been provided by the state budget. And going back to that, we would have a couple of billions more. So there's deficiency 1 trillion hryvnias. This is something that has to be financed in some way. And there's not a lot of options of what can we do that, because, you know, we don't have the loan markets. We can either finance it with the support of the external foreign help or with the help of emission. And basically, so with the help of the inflation tax. So, you know, inflation is also one of the factors why we have more taxes coming. The critical period is going to be the first quarter of the year 2023, because we don't have the certainty yet. We don't have the certainty that we're going to receive this committed money from our international partners starting from January. In case of the US, we have more certainty to that. In case of the EU, we still have the open question of having the permissions from all of the European Union members, especially with Hungary. So there is, you know, the first quarter is very critical for us. So that here we also have in mind the sad story of the April June 2022, because in the first months we have exhausted the donors' resources that didn't need a lot of permission mechanisms, and in March we had a normally financed budget deficiency. But then you can see that through the April, May and June there was a strong deficiency because we needed to finance military expenses, but the income imports of the international and foreign assistance was really at the lowest level. So that's why we've got to the emission and monetary financial support to it got us to the higher inflation, and it got us to the devaluation of hryvnia. So right now we see that the situation is more or less the same, is more or less sustainable, and I do hope that this is the situation that we're going to have in year 2023. That is an important factor for the fiscal stability of the state. So that is why we've had this issue of international support. We had this first panel of our forum, and if you have not seen it yet, please take a look at the recorded version of it. The second point here, during the time of war, it's really hard for us to model and to forecast of what is going to happen to the budget and the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty involved, and the budget is going to be based on the macroeconomical forecast of the Ministry of Economy, and also the income of taxes is going to build on that as well. Up to the second, we had the second reading, we have decreased the budget incomes because at that point we've already had the first attacks on the energy industry. We understand that there might have been a very optimistic forecast on the level of 3.2%. So we have the first evaluations of the investment companies like Dragon Capital. They believe that we're going to have minus 5% of the dynamics of the GDP at the very beginning of the year 2023. But by the end of the year 2023, starting from the quarter 4, we're going to have increase and is going to compensate this downfall of 5%. So the government has to be ready that our income is going to be lower than it has been planned, and the government has to be ready there might be the short-term breakage in liquidity because there are some technical problems for the taxpayers when they will not be able, for example, to get all of their payments in time. So, the accountants will not have the access to the system, for example. And that might be this short-term impact factor as well. The good thing is that up till the second reading of the parliament that we have been reviewing this forecast, that's very good. And the amount of the income part for the GDP in 2023 has now been indicated at 3 percentage points lower than this year. That gives us more expectations that the budget is going to be implemented without the big problems. And the one thing that I also wanted to talk about as the key topic of my presentation as well, because I'm going to try to make faster, but because I'm taking a lot of your time, but that's important. Why the VAT is important. This in October 2022, that has been 57% of all of the fiscal part of it. I know that I haven't read the new updates, but for the budget 2023, the VAT is 53.5% of all of the fiscal income. And thus, the extraction and administration of this task is very important for our fiscal stability and fiscal resilience. This year, especially in the last months, we have some really unpleasant ways in administrating the VAT, first of all, unpleasant for the businesses, because what has been interesting in this case, we know that we have almost the same income from the VAT from the year before, and this year we have the compensation levels on 59 million hryvnias less than last year. And if we will compare this correlation between how the VAT that has been paid for the services that have been paid in Ukraine, that's only 38%. I'm just going to show you the graph that is going to give you the clear understanding why that is really hard right now. So, and it's also the prolonging the time of the compensation of the VAT. So, these correlations of how much VAT has been compensated and how much have income, maybe if you do not see that, then to compensate the VAT, that is actually a fiscal loan, and this is the tool that gives the opportunity for all of the businesses to pay the tax only for the VAT, for the added value. So they have this compensation on the VAT for the product that they have bought and the services that they have bought while producing the new product. If they didn't have that, then the VAT actually turns into the tax on the flow. And we have seen that we had a really small part of the compensation on the VAT compared to the VAT income. That actually gives us the understanding that the money have been taken out of the business. We can say, of course, that that is also fighting against the violations, but again, what we have seen that we have the indicator is twice lower than the average throughout the previous years, and we cannot explain it by just saying that we're closing some of the violations or malfunctioning. If we will take a look at the statistics of when the applications have been submitted and when the money have been provided on the compensation of the PDV, there's a lot of figures here. But in yellow, this is the time period that is needed since the application to the compensation. In the last decade, basically the main amount of the VAT compensation have been compensated throughout 30 or 40 days after the application has been submitted. Starting from summer this year, this term has now increased up to 100 days. And so basically 114 days was the average term for compensating the VAT. That means that for 2 months, the state can exist on behalf of the cash flow of the businesses, and that's not really good for the businesses. And also, we have the story, and I think that maybe Volodymyr Kutsenko will talk about that in more details, and maybe some other panelists as well, that starting from October, we have had a much harsher administrating of the VAT. There are problems with registering the declarations, and all of these problems with compensations of the VAT. Let us be trying to be objective. The problems with compensation of the VAT, the compensation of the monies that have been approved, they are connected to that our treasury account did not have enough money. And of course, government and the Ministry of Finance, they're prioritizing the expenses for the defense. But if we are talking about the harsher administrating of that, then it has a lot of bad sides. The administrative pressure for the businesses, because you have to reason a lot for the fiscal services. There's the loss of trust for the businesses, from the businesses to the state. And basically, that's a big problem for everyone as well. This is something that we need to address and something that we need to see in our next policies. Another resilient factor is also the cut out of the current discounts and bringing up the fiscal basis. I know that everyone maybe, I do remember that we've had the two packages of the fiscal changes, the one that had broadened and simplified the fiscal systems for all of the businesses. And as we have already seen, as a result of it, it didn't reach the goals of stimulating the economy because, yes, the fiscal policies has already been very stimulating even before, and it is still very stimulating. And only for it to provide some effects, then, we need the economy work in a different way, not like it works in the military time. So it's not just about the fiscal pressure. It's not going to influence the opportunity for the businesses to broaden their activities. There are some other limiting factors. It's not just about the taxes. And what we have seen in the statistics right now and in the end of September, when we have this 2% of the simplified fiscal taxes, that was in the way the cannibalization of the existing simplified facilitated systems. In our point of view, that was unfair during the wartime to decrease the fiscal pressure for the businesses that have been already using the very good conditions of the simplified system. Yes, we need to simplify the issues of administrating the taxes. We need to decrease the administrative pressure and not to violate and abuse the usage of the compensation for the VAT. But yes, the businesses have to pay the taxes even during the war. That's a very fair expectations for the citizens in the state. So it didn't stimulate the short chains of sales, and in a combination with a non-effective work of the customs, that was an additional channel for the shadow retail, for the shadow sale. That's even a broader channel for redistributing something that in Ukraine has been delivered illegally, but not had been produced in Ukraine. And it might cause to the moment when we are narrowing the basis for the fiscal moments, and it's going to be increasing the administrative pressure for the businesses with the indicators, with the requirements to pay the part of the share of your taxes, the share of your flow, the cash flow. Even though I think that it hasn't been forecasted in any kind of documents, in any kind of legislations, but we still have the indicators there. That might cause the next substitution of the businesses that even had the idea to work. Clearly, they're going to go in shadow. And we need to avoid this spiral, because this is going to be the main challenge for our fiscal resilience. The fifth point, actually, working effectively with the customs, that this is the main bottleneck for all of our fiscal policies, because it gives us the opportunity to have tax-less imports. Tax-less imports is going to be a competitor to the main legal import, and is not going to be not only decreasing the fiscal income, that it's also going to be pushing other businesses into the shadows, and so we will have decrease of the taxes from those businesses as well. And what is important, that the corruption in the very first point is going to be providing the corruption opportunities for other states, because this is the money that are going to be available for the corrupted entrepreneurs, and basically that is going to be the roles that is going to be then widened throughout the system. That's not a novelty for the military time, but this is something that we should not go to. Then, this kind of situation in the customs, it makes the regulations ineffective. For example, if we would like to have the additional import taxes, or we've had additional idea on the wealth taxation, for example, if we would like to build the imports in a different way, which is might be a good idea during the wartime. But then once again, if we don't have the good collaborations with the customs, it will only switch these products who might be taxed like those are going to be taken to the shadow economy. So the same problems we see in the export services as well. When the exporters are not being compensated for the VAT, when there is the opportunity, for example, to make some of the agreements with the custom services directly, then it is again increasing the opportunity of the shadow expert, and this is something that gives a lot of opportunities, and it gives a lot of problems for the fiscal stability and resilience as well. Just to sum up, what are the critical resilience factors for the next year? First of all, that's again the sustainability of the international support. We need to work with donors. We're doing that with the government and with the non-governmental organizations. We need to advocate. We need to have the adaptive economy. That's easier said than done, but I think that the government has to cope with the short-term liquidity gaps, and we need to have plans what to do with that. The clear ideas of how the VAT is going to be administrated, we need to seize the administrative pressure, and we need to provide the transparency of how the VAT is administered. If we don't have the transparency, we don't have the accountability, and we don't have its basically understanding of how to work with it. So we need to publish this detailed statistics on the registration of the fiscal declarations, and we need to provide the access to the register of the VAT compensation, maybe with some limitations or restrictions due to the safety reasons. But we need to have it line by line just for us to see what are the statistics and what are the compensations of the VAT provided. The increase of the fiscal base, I am more or less calm with that, because it's already had been anchored into the program with the International Monetary Fund, the one that we've had with the IMF. It's going to be including these parameters here as well, so we are hoping for the changes to come in this sector. And to try to decrease the fiscal stability threats from the side of the customs service, we need to have the reform of the customs service of Ukraine, because they're going to be the big threat for the future still. And not to take a lot of time from our panelists no more, so after the war will be over, when the war is over, when, I will just say, like, how do I see that? How do I see what I want to say by the war is over? When the main military activities are going to be ended up with a good military and a good insurance guarantees for Ukrainian businesses, so that the businesses could be continuing their activity almost as during the peacetime. What would be the challenges then? Due to the very soft fiscal policy right now, we are having this really cash points in the bank. This is the cautions. So, the National Bank are working really hard so that this money would be still connected into the banking system, because otherwise this money is going to be influencing the inflation. And so basically, after the war is going to be over, like at least in this temporary situation that's important for us to get this cash cushion into the consumption, something that the people have spent as the black die savings, the military man, maybe to good results, they have some more savings that they had, and their families had some savings that they had. All of that is going to be turning to the consumption. The businesses are going to start some of the things. And we have this need of the macro stability and the conflict between macro stability and this fast renovation, because the fast renovation means that there's going to be income of the big money to Ukraine. And if we do not have enough offers towards that money, if we don't have enough construction materials, qualified employees, starting from the constructors, ending up with project managers and others, that might heat up the inflation, and that will be one of the biggest challenges for the Ministry of Finance as well, and for the national banks as well, just for us to hold the macro stability of Ukraine. Another question is the state debts. And by the end of the year, we're expected to be a little bit less than 100% of the Ukrainian GDP. As of the end of 2022, it is like 84% right now. But in the times of war, that's a normal indicators. But after the war, there's going to be the restricting factor for the opportunities of the state, to engage additional financial resources. So, it's easier said than done, but we need to see that the international and foreign support would be as much as possible under the granting conditions or the very low interest loans, because otherwise the growth of the debt towards GDP would be the big signal for most of the loan givers as a risks factor, and will not be able to engage the market money with those interests that we are able to financially service. So that's all from the part of my overview, and I think I will pass the floor first of all to our panelists. And first of all, I would like to ask our online participants to join us, the ones that are in Zoom. So we have Olena Makeieva, who is the General Director of the Aksonova&Associates auditing company. So please, Olena, the floor is yours. I would like to, first of all, listen to your point of view of how do you see the fiscal policy right now? So what do you forecast for the next years to come? What would be the challenges? What would be the challenges that we have, and what would be the resilience factors that you see? Because I definitely have listed something, but what would be the obvious for you? Yes, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you. And Yura, I do agree to everything that you have said as the results of your research and that you have conducted. So yes, for sure, in the 9 months of war, so what we have seen, that we have seen a very big narrowing of the fiscal base through the different discounts and through the decrease of the number of the taxpayers. We had around 1,000 taxpayers that usually formed basically the 80% of the budget of the country, and we have less and less of them now. So the pressure for those who really pay the taxes is now increased, and we are now can only be dependent for the lower number of the taxpayers. If we will take a look at the top of the 20 taxpayers in the last 20 years, then you will see there's international companies like tobacco companies are going to be among the top 10 payers. We're going to see the state-owned companies, the Ukernafta, Ukrgazvidobывание, Naftogaz, the operator of the gas and transport system, Ukrtransgaz, and other companies. So I do believe that the taxes will depend on how good the state-owned companies are going to be governed. And so we're talking about the corporate governance reform that we have now kind of proclaimed, but we're not moving forward with that. If among those top 20 taxpayers and like international businesses will fulfill the fiscal needs fully, but we don't know whether the taxes are paid by our state-owned companies. And this is the factor of resilience for me as well. The good high-quality corporate governance of the state-owned companies who are going to be paying both taxes and the dividends into the budget of the country. The second point that I wanted to outline, I do agree that we need to have the customs services, the customs restarted, but I think that we're doing nothing in reforming the fiscal services as well. Unfortunately, right now, paying taxes is the part of charity as well. When the people are telling me that, we do not know what we can do, how we can help our country more, then I'm always saying just, paying taxes is the good support, your support to the country, because all of the financial support to the Ukrainian army is being done by the taxes that you have paid. So continuing your business conduct and paying taxes, this is your voluntary activity, and this is your donations. You're paying your donations to the army with the taxes. And of course, if we do not have the services in the fiscal services, if the fiscal service is still working old-fashioned way, and they're continuing to work with the Soviet approach, so when we have the fiscal services presenting, I'm listening to them and I'm thinking like, can they find a person who's going to be talking in a very different way with the taxpayers just for the people to want to pay the taxes? So it's not only reforming the customs, it's also reforming the fiscal services. I don't know for how many years we have been talking about that, but we need to have this key new person, like, I don't know, like maybe Fadarev, or like, a person who might drive these big ministries and, to digitalize them even. I think that we cannot even speak of any kind of reform from the inside, and we need to know how to administer the VAT that Yuri has paid a lot of attention to, and you have said a lot of important things about that and the right things about that as well. So just to sum up, what does the business need? It needs sustainable financial policy and sustainability in the country for both the international, for the foreign investors and domestic investors as well. What does the state need? We need financial stability so that the public financials, for that we will be able to pay salaries. And the fiscal policies, it has to correspond to the outcomes of the war, and we have to fit into the to the needs of the businesses. So we have to ask ourselves questions. So does it respond to the ideas that the businesses have? So first, not to get back to these examples, like for example, 2% of the simplified fiscal taxes. So this is going to be taken down soon. Why the companies didn't switch to that? Because they've understood that it's going to be taken down quite soon. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comment. In your point of view, just like, I want to have another question for you. In your point of view, is it, first of all, should we conduct the reforms in customs services, in fiscal services, on, for example, reforming the governance structures of the services? Well, I do fully agree with you that we need to turn the fiscal service into actually servicing organizations. So, the fiscal services, they should not be the part of the fiscal policy building. They should be only providing the services to the taxpayers. I completely agree with you on that. But do you think that this kind of change is possible during the hot phase of the war? And the second question, do you believe that there might be some significant changes made to the fiscal policies during the war? Can we change the taxes? Can we change the foundation of the taxes during the war? Or is it way too risky, or we don't have the time to wait? I'm always the supporter of the balanced policy. I don't know what would I do at the very beginning of the war, but I think that we needed to, take down the commissions from the business, and we needed to respond to certain needs. For example, we have the needs for the imports for different kind of equipment for the energy sector, and we have to provide this change with, for example, VAT-free of that. But the big reforms of the fiscal policy, doing that nothing without no need and not knowing whether the businesses are going to use it, this is a bad policies. We have to stick to the staples, than just, taking that down and postponing the reforms that not giving us any results. But on the reforms of administrating the taxes, I think the first thing that we should have done is, well, to complete the competition, or, choosing the person who is going to be leading the fiscal services, the person who has trust, and so that the business would like to pay the taxes to the person. And we didn't have this this. Because, if we have a person who is managing the fiscal services and they have the trust and they're changing the rhetoric, they're having the reforms made, they're talking to businesses in a different way, they're having a digitalization there. The one thing that you have to take down is the communication between the businesses and the fiscal officers, just to automate it, just to have it a very nice user interface and nice communication. I think that would have been the best reform ever. So, this is the first person, the leader is responsible for that. When you're changing the leader, then the rhetorics of other people is going to be changed as well. So you cannot reform something without choosing the head of the fiscal services that is going to have the trust of all of the Ukrainians and are going to be, paying the taxes just like they donate to the military needs. Okay, Olena, thank you very much. I do agree to everything that you've said, because it's not only the rhetorics of the head of the fiscal services that it's important, but basically the businesses, they only have the rhetorics of how the local fiscal inspectors are talking to them on the local level. So that is what is very important. This top-down voice has to be supported in practice. Then I would like to pass the floor to Svitlana, who is the deputy head of the European Business Association. So Svitlana, what do you hear from the fiscal officers right now? So what is the business now thinking about the fiscal system overall? How do the businesses that are the part of the European Business Associations finding themselves with the fiscal services collaboration now? Yes, thank you so much. Pleasure to meet everyone. It's a pleasure and honor for me to be the part of our discussion today. I would agree to what has been voiced out in your research and what Olena has said as well. Maybe I will emphasize some of the other parts as well. The reforms are needed for sure, but when we're talking about administrating, the one thing that I really liked, we need to change this interfaces, first of all, because yes, under the wartime, the businesses are continuing to pay the taxes. They still have some social function as well. They're paying the salaries, they're keeping up the job positions. They're still carrying a lot of pressure. But our businesses, there are incredible heroes that are still continuing their business conduct. And I'm really happy that I can continue and representing their interests as well. So at some point you're being actually surprised by, not that nice interface that everyone has been dreaming of. And there's a question about the blocking of the tax declarations and the postponement of the compensation and the lack of understanding of the processes. We have spoken about that, we need to have the highly qualified people hired to do the fiscal services. But right now, during the inspection, people don't even understand what the operating expenses are. And when they do not believe that something is the operational expenses during the production of something, this is definitely strange. Then again, the issues of how the sentences of the courts are being provided. We have the court sentences and there is no opportunity to take the sentences executed and implemented. So we had addressed the corresponding governmental institutions on the need of reporting from the DPS services, from the fiscal services of Ukraine, on how these rulings of the court have been completed. We have some of the moments of the mistreatment when there are some of the checks that have been completed and when the primary documents have been asked when there was during the inspections, which is a big violation of the procedure. So there are different, those approaches, they have been used widely by the fiscal officers, and we have to say that the fiscal services, they have to respond to this kind of systematic violations that have seen in their practices. If the legislation has been violated, it has to be reported. And we do believe that this is something that is adding up the pressure to the businesses that is currently working under very harsh conditions. So we have also spoken about the questions of the energy, and one of the cases, one of the examples, due to the lack of the energy supply, the entrepreneurs, the private entrepreneurs, they're buying the generators. So they need to preserve those fuels in the buckets. We have already raised these questions, preserving the fuels in buckets requires licensing. We have raised these questions, but we do hope that this decision is going to be made and some changes and amendments are going to be approved, whether it's going to be a decree by the Cabinet of Ministries or whether it's going to be at the level of law. But the fiscal officers are checking that already and providing fines. And we are living in the same country under the same conditions, but there are different approach. There's a lot of questions, but speaking about the customs, when we're talking about the reforms for the customs services and the fiscal services for quite a long time, but what is bad for all of us in all of this situation, because the businesses, and I'm going to be continue saying that the businesses are on the brim of extinctions and they're fighting for their survivals, and they are seeing the ways of corruption, which is inappropriate and unacceptable. So we have seen the feedback from the companies that there are no big changes on the global level, and except it's not about actually making some big changes, but we should actually get closer to the ideas of the administrating of the taxes already. But the reform, and speaking about the fighting corruption, those are the measures that we should not those are the measures we should care about. So basically, there is a lot of unacceptable situations in the time of peace or in the times of war. So those are the things that we have to fight and fight together. So we not only have to start the dialogue, but we have to do a lot of these steps together for the businesses and government. So that's why we're also always asking the fiscal services to establish this dialogue with businesses all the time. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So, just to sum up to what we have heard, in the context of the customs services, so, we have to understand that, like, you're representing the big and middle business that is owned, that feels itself quite comfortably, but on the other hand, you're facing the corruption problems in the customs service, and on the other hand, you also have some operational problems that are also slowing the businesses down. But do you have any signals actually on, I don't know, the impact of the illegal imports? Because I do know that there are some business models among your members of your associations that are dependent on the exports and imports. Yes, of course, we have seen that, and we know that it's possible, and we know that the illegal trade and the illegal imports, that on one hand, they would never be possible without the support of the corruption schemes in the customs. And there's a lot of things that we have to do to fight the shadow trade, to fight the shadow economy. And we need to get to the digital solutions and the digital ideas. But we need to spread the information as well, to spread information between the fiscal services and the customs. So we have a lot of changes that has happened. The NCTS, the Euromed, there's new opportunity that has been now facilitating and simplifying the international trade. But in practice, what we see right now, the inspectors or the customs officers, they have no idea of how to work and how to deal with these processes in practice. So that is also very important to teach them how to do. On fighting the shadow trade, this is the question that has been voiced out. Not the first time, this is the unequal competition that it decreases our opportunities as a competitors. And right now in European business associations as well, we are trying to encourage the businesses, international businesses, to have businesses in Ukraine. That is very hard. And I do agree to what you have said. We need to have the security and risks guarantees for the justify their own investments. But the rhetorics of our potential partners when they're speaking about Ukraine, unfortunately, the first thing that they're talking about is corruption. So we have to restore the trust towards government and towards our legislation. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. I will now pass the floor to Volodymyr Kutsenko, who is the expert of the Business Ombudsman Council, one of the most experienced experts of this council, and I had the pleasure to work with him as well. So, Volodya, I would like to ask you, to share your experience of what do you see what is going on right now, and just to focus on the two important things. What would be the problems and what would be the signals that you have received and you have seen in the last 2 months from the businesses, and maybe the systematic approach as well? What would be the systematic nature of the claims that you have received, of what we haven't yet spoken about? Yes, Yuri, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be the part of your discussion. And maybe you have all known, and starting from December, we have also changed our work to become more of a helpline. And right now we are getting back to working with the claims in our daily regime. So what we have seen throughout this time and throughout this year, I wouldn't say that we have more claims coming, but I think that I think that might be my observation that, Ukrainian businesses are so resilient that, they, in some sense, they coming up to all of this situation with a lot of understanding, and because, people are trying to cope with these problems with quite a big level of understanding. But we have seen that starting from October that the businesses were really frustrated, and there was a lot of people who were all of the people were nervous with knowing how all of the fiscal declarations have been blocked, and this problem of the compensation has been increasing as well, and people got frustrated with that. We've been constantly talking to the fiscal services, to the state fiscal services on the level of our working group. We have our educational webinars conducted all the time. Like yesterday, we've had another working webinar with them. So the state fiscal services, they're trying to reflect to this problem, but in what way? Well, getting a step back, starting from year 2020, when we have our systemic report on the administrating of the taxes, the one thing that you have mentioned as well in your presentation, you're talking about the transparency of the administrating of the taxes. This is something that, clicked in my head as well, because, we're working with that every day on the day-to-day basis, and we have the systematic recommendations as well, so that their decisions on the tables of calculation, so basically on the stopping of the registration of the fiscal declarations and stuff, so that would be reasoned, because this kind of a simple thing is causing a lot of problems, actually. Even having the next understanding of when the position of the DPS is not be supported in the court, and maybe even if they had some of the malpractices, but if in the final resolution of the state services, then the court is going to return it and not in the state fiscal services favor. So the same thing about their data tables. So what we have seen right now, that they have launched some communicational platforms, they have launched the hotline, and at least the first impression, even from our claimants, they are actually they are able to get to this hotline, and they have some information about the reasons why the declaration has been denied. So that is a very good signal. They know this information from the hotline, and we hope that this is going to be then continued, because it takes a lot of work and is definitely going to take a lot of misunderstandings down. And if if then the final reports by the fiscal services will include the reasons for denial, then the fiscal services itself will see that they do not need to turn to, the ombudsman's councils or, asking the members of the parliament to restore the situation. It will work on its own. That would be a nice moment for me in my work when I'm not going to receive claims from the companies, I already see that there's a real businesses and they should not have any problems with administrating taxes. Actually, they should not have any problems to turn to us. And when we're going to see that it means that the service function is performed in the best way, and the function that Olena has mentioned as well today. So right now, we're watching the situation's development very clearly, and we didn't have the time yet, but I'm going to say that, this is a very trendy thing, so you can follow the news from the business ombudsman, and you should be waiting for some news to come up. And we are tracking that. We are hoping to find some new solutions. And talking about the administrative pressure, we haven't yet converted it into the number of claims, but we are tracking the thoughts of our business communities as well. We're taking it serious. We see some good steps from the side of the state service. Will it be enough? Time will show. So that would be the information from my side, and maybe I will be able to cover some of the additional questions that you might have. I'm slightly mixed up because I have a lot of questions, and I'm thinking what kind of question I should choose. But basically, what's going on right now with the customs? With the customs, we didn't have that many claims, that many complaints, but from what we had some systematic, old, outdated things, but I hope that they will be resolved. As, for example, after their, divorce with the fiscal services, like we don't have the same synchronous work of the informational systems, which really is strange. And this is the problem that has been relevant starting from the 2019. That's the first thing that I've thought about. And as always, I do understand that there's a lot of problems in the customs. Some of the problems that we have heard about in the past, and I know that there are some problems that are still relevant right now, but it develops so fast administrative-wise, because we have to be the part of this work, and we have to be the part of this work at the stage of the administrative part, when this case is not yet taken to the court. And it's really, really, really hard to find this moment when we can actually help. Speaking on behalf of my colleagues, the ones that have been curating the work for the military services, at least the colleagues, they're ready to contact people, they're ready to meet, they're not going against that, they're ready to explain their position. But again, then that this is still the big part of the bad reputation here is that, we have to conduct these meetings. We need to find all of the things out, and because it might have all been clear from the very beginning when you establish the process. When you're communicating with a customs service. So basically, that's the situation with the customs. Yeah, that's sure. That is this added value in administrating and of the taxes in the non-productive loss of time and lose of focus for the business leaders. So basically, you might have been working in a more productive direction, but losing the time for that. But okay, while we still have this situation, I'm really happy that the Council of the Business Ombudsman is actually supporting us to minimize this business cost, because it really helps with our understanding, mutual understanding. We'll have to close because we need to start our next panel. Just we'll make the final moment. I've mentioned that before. The fiscal policy is not just taxes, but because we have a situation that with our system that we're actually all targeting to the defense, and all of the others are being set to on the minimum. We do have no opportunity to talk about the moments of how our economy is going to work. We're only talking about the restructurizing our debt. We have discussed the issue of international assistance in our first panel, and I would like to ask you to listen to that because it was very interesting and representative discussion. So what we have discussed in our part of the discussion, we have spoken about the fiscal policies and incomes and the customs, the fiscal services that are important moments for the fiscal stability of the country, and for the moral and emotional resilience for, dozens of thousands of accountants in this country. So thank you very much for being a part of our panel. I'm really grateful to the participants of our discussion for joining us here. Thank you very much, Volodymyr, for coming to us offline, and we're giving the time for the next discussion. The next discussion is going to be on the topic that is the topic number one for Ukraine throughout last months, and that was be even for months and a half, that this is the energy wars, the resilience of our country in the conditions of the energy terror of Russians. So we will just have a minute, and in a minute we're going to start the next panel.